There are moments in life that feel small and harmless, yet they open the door to a storm no one ever sees coming. A man stands on his front porch on a quiet afternoon. He hears the distant wail of sirens, the steady footsteps of police officers responding to a minor fender bender just outside. It is the kind of everyday scene any neighborhood might witness. Nothing dramatic, nothing worth remembering. And he smiles. A relaxed, effortless smile, the kind any ordinary American might have when watching something that has nothing to do with them. Just a slice of life. Just a little moment that amuses him. He lifts his phone, snaps a few pictures, sends them to his friends. A familiar action in this age. We all do it. We send a photo to tell a story, to share a laugh, to capture a moment. No one imagines it could alter the course of their entire life, but for this man, it did. That small gesture pushed him from being an invisible figure to becoming one of the most valuable targets in the eyes of Britain's crime-fighting units. Because sometimes, what destroys an empire isn't guns, betrayal, or the police. It is the very human carelessness we all carry within us. One photo, one lapse in awareness, 1 second of believing everything is still under our control. And that is exactly where everything begins to fall apart. When people think of drug traffickers, they usually picture hardened faces, intimidating tattoos, men who flaunt cash and weapons. But Michael McN was nothing like that. He did not look like someone stepped out of a violent crime movie. He was not the kind of man who would make you move aside if you passed him on the street. In fact, if you lived in the same neighborhood, you would probably see him as a quiet, polite, soft-spoken man, even a little shy. A face that blended into the crowd, unremarkable, unthreatening. A man who bought his morning coffee the same way every day and always nodded at his neighbors. And that was exactly what made him dangerous. The man everyone thought was ordinary was the center of a criminal network worth tens of millions of pounds. An empire not built on violence, but on silence. No showing off, no trail left behind, no behavior that drew suspicion. He chose to become part of the background, like a neutral shade in the larger painting of the city. In daily life, McN looked like any other middle-class worker. No luxury cars, no wild parties, none of the flashy symbols that crime bosses often use to assert their power. He understood something very well. Noise is the enemy of safety, and McN chose to move softly, live quietly, and sink beneath the surface. The way he walked, the way he talked, even the way he dressed, all communicated one thing: normal. A kind of normal that made it impossible for others to guess that beneath that exterior was a mind calculating every hour, every shipment, every kilogram of drugs being moved across the region. When the COVID pandemic swept across the United Kingdom, everything slowed to a crawl. Streets emptied as if time itself had stretched thin. Stores shut their doors. Traffic faded. People withdrew into their homes, searching for some sense of safety in a world that had suddenly become uncertain and fragile. For many, it was a season of fear, of loss, of a vulnerability they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. But for those who lived in the shadows, like McN, that same chaos opened a rare opportunity. Lockdown did not just freeze everyday life. It created enormous blind spots in police surveillance. Delivery vehicles became essential. Couriers were granted the freedom to move. Checkpoints focused only on social distancing enforcement. The entire law enforcement system was stretched thin by an invisible threat that no one fully understood. And while millions of people stayed behind closed doors with their anxieties, McN saw a wide open road. In his mind, Lockdown was not a crisis. It was a brand new map. Clean, uncluttered, and easier to navigate than ever before. Empty streets turned into perfect transport routes. Police attention shifted toward ordinary citizens, not toward those who slipped quietly through the night. McN began to accelerate. He no longer worried about being tailed, no longer feared crowded hotspots, drawing unwanted attention. Every part of his operation became unsettlingly smooth. His van moved through the city like it was simply another piece of the logistics network keeping Britain alive during the pandemic. Drop-off points grew safer because no one was leaving their homes to be curious. And the demand for illegal substances surged as people sat alone within four walls, facing loneliness, stress, and loss. During the first 3 months of lockdown, McN's cash flow surpassed every previous phase of his criminal career. This was no longer a small operation. It had become a money machine powered by society's fear and sustained by the silence of empty streets. But there was one thing McN did not understand, or perhaps was not sensitive enough to notice. In a time when the country was deeply wounded, every movement a criminal made left a clearer trace. Not a physical footprint, but a digital one. A misplaced transaction. A message sent at the wrong moment. A van traveling the same quiet routes too consistently. The legal system was under pressure, but it never slept. McN used lockdown as a springboard to push his empire to its peak. But the stillness of the pandemic amplified every mistake he made. And once those mistakes surfaced, no layer of secrecy was thick enough to save him. In the modern world of organized crime, technology is often treated like an invisible suit of armor. It convinces people that they can stand in plain sight and still remain unseen. And for Michael McN, EncroChat was exactly that. A device built specifically for those who wanted to slip out of law enforcement's line of sight. A phone with no camera, no microphone, no saved data, capable of destroying messages and wiping itself clean with a single remote command. To McN, it was more than a tool. It was a feeling of safety. A kind of safety he had not felt in years. Men like McN rarely trust other people, but they trust technology. They trust cold metal and encrypted strings of code they believe are impenetrable. Holding an EncroChat device made McN feel as if he were standing inside a sealed room, a world separate from every surveillance method the police had used for decades. A world where his voice, his plans, and his trafficking routes existed only as unreadable lines of data. And that sense of safety lulled him. It made him careless, overly confident in his ability to hide. EncroChat did not just shield McN. It made him forget that people, not machines, are always the weakest link. When you believe you are speaking in a room with no ears listening, you speak more freely, more comfortably, and you say things that even the most cautious person would avoid. And McN did exactly that. He spoke with his associates every day, not in secret meetings where hooded men whispered in the dark, but through simple, fast messages, sometimes even sprinkled with humor, prices, locations, risks, little inside jokes he thought were nothing more than shared laughs among people on the same side. Everything happened on EncroChat. It became the invisible diary of his entire empire. But the problem was never the technology. The problem was the absolute trust McN placed in it. Like so many others, he believed encryption was the perfect shield, that the police could not break it, that no one outside his circle could ever see inside. And when a person believes they are standing in a place of complete safety, they forget that overconfidence is often the beginning of collapse. What McN could never have known was that hundreds of miles away from England, cybersecurity experts in France and the Netherlands had quietly found the key to the door he believed was unbreakable. They did not need to crack the messages. They did not need to decode the entire system. Instead, they slipped into the room before McN could close the door. They saw every message the moment he typed it. Every delivery instruction, every warning, every moment he thought he was untouchable. That confidence, the kind that technology gives, became a double-edged blade. McN did not just entrust EncroChat with his secrets, he entrusted it with the only thing a criminal must never surrender: his vigilance. In his eyes, the phone was not a risk. It was an extension of his power, and that belief led him directly into the greatest mistake of his life. To McN, EncroChat was a steel wall, but when investigators finally saw inside, they did not see a mastermind hidden behind an impenetrable system. They saw a man saying far too much in a room he believed was sealed, and that was the moment everything began to turn against him. The biggest mistakes in life rarely happen in moments of tension. They do not scream, they do not warn, they do not arrive wearing the face of danger. They often come quietly, in the most ordinary moments, when a person feels the safest. For Michael McN, that mistake arrived on an afternoon that seemed harmless, as he stood in his front yard, hands in his pockets, listening to police officers handle a minor traffic collision right outside his door. Something in that moment made him relax. Perhaps it was the familiarity of his neighborhood. Perhaps it was the feeling of being just another neighbor, watching something that had nothing to do with him. Or perhaps it was the blind belief that he had built a disguise thick enough that no one could see through it. Whatever the reason, McN crossed the fatal line of the criminal world with one simple action. He lifted his EncroChat phone and took a picture. Not one, several. He even sent them to his friends with a joke with a very American flavor. The kind of joke millions of people send daily to their friends. Just storytelling. Just sharing a moment. Just a little laugh to lighten the day. And that very human act, the same one anyone might do, became the thing that dismantled the empire he spent years building. In those pictures, nothing looked unusual to the naked eye. Officers standing around a car, a wash of yellow light on wet pavement, a corner of a fence, a slice of wall, a white van resting quietly in the driveway as if it had been there forever. But to investigators, it was not scenery. It was a map, a trail, a thread thin enough to seem meaningless, yet strong enough to unravel an entire criminal network. What McN did not understand was that a camera does more than capture images. It captures location. It captures time. It captures the angle of light, the direction of shadows, the details people ignore, but technology never does. The metadata behind each photo was an invisible signature. A signature he unknowingly handed straight to the police through the very system he believed was untouchable. And then there was the van. The white Renault Kangoo with a plate ending in 66. The same one he had mentioned in EncroChat messages. The same vehicle used to move product. It sat quietly in his driveway, appearing in the photo as if introducing itself to law enforcement. No complex deduction was needed. Everything was inside the frame McN captured. A complete portrait of the life he tried to hide. What makes this mistake tragic is not the act of taking the photo. The tragedy lies in the fact that, in that moment, McN allowed himself to feel human again. He smiled. He shared. He lowered the defenses he had built for years. 1 second of ease. One ordinary moment. One relatable, deeply human softness. And that softness cost him something technology could never protect. In the criminal world, complacency never comes during danger. It always comes during calm. And McN paid with his life's freedom for a photo he thought was harmless. It was not the mistake of a crime boss. It was the mistake of a human being. A human being who forgot that technology can hide actions, but it cannot hide emotion. While McTen believed he was living inside an impenetrable safety zone, hundreds of miles away from England, a silent war had already begun. There were no gunshots, no chase scenes, no flashing blue lights. Instead, it was a war fought through lines of code, servers humming in the dark, and teams of men and women working through the night with nothing but the glow of computer screens to keep them awake. Operation Venetic, a campaign almost no criminal had heard of, yet one that would bring nearly all of them to their knees. What many people forget is that police officers are human too. They are not superheroes stepping out of action movies. They have exhausting mornings, sleepless nights, rushed dinners eaten between tasks. But it is exactly that endurance, that quiet persistence, that builds the kind of breakthroughs criminals never expect. When EncroChat became a refuge for tens of thousands of offenders, investigators knew they had to find a way to break through its encrypted walls, not to catch one man, but to protect an entire society. Experts in France and the Netherlands chose an approach unlike anything seen on screen. They did not try to crack the encryption. They did not attempt to decode endless strings of characters. Instead, they found a way to slip inside before the door closed. Silently, they implanted a tool into the EncroChat system itself, allowing every message, every photo, every drug trafficking instruction to be copied and delivered straight into the hands of law enforcement. The brilliance and brutality of it was that the criminals had no idea. They kept talking, kept planning, kept feeling safe, while on the other side of the screen, every word was being traced like threads leading straight to the center of their networks. This was not just technological genius, it was human perseverance. No one saw the nights when investigators nodded off over their keyboards. No one saw the hours-long debates over how to enter the system without leaving a trace. But it was those invisible efforts that created one of the most devastating intellectual counterstrikes in the history of European crime. And when the data finally began to flow, it was like opening a door into a room full of secrets no one ever expected to witness. Thousands of drug traffickers, money launderers, weapons smugglers. Thousands of stories from cities drowning in shadows. Thousands of fragments waiting to be assembled. And among the names flashing across the screen was one that soon became the focus of the Merseyside investigation. Lanky Panda, Michael McN. Operation Venetic did more than expose EncroChat. It shattered the blind confidence of an entire criminal world that believed technology would protect them forever. It revealed a truth few want to accept. No matter how much encryption, no matter how specialized the device, no matter how carefully you try to hide, you can never outrun human persistence and human intelligence. And as the data began aligning with real life, as McN's photos and messages surfaced with undeniable clarity, investigators knew his downfall was no longer a question of if, but when. When the EncroChat data began pouring in, the police were not just reading messages, they were reading lives. And among millions of lines of information, the photos McN sent that afternoon stood out in a strange, unmistakable way. A minor traffic collision, a cluster of officers handling the scene, a corner of a fence, a slice of a house wall, and a white Kangoo van resting quietly in the driveway. Everything seemed ordinary, yet to investigators, these were pieces of a puzzle far larger than they appeared. The police started with the simplest step. They matched the timestamp on the photo with the incident logs of the local police station. And just as they expected, there had indeed been a collision reported on that day, at that hour, on that exact stretch of road. It was like the soft click of a puzzle piece sliding perfectly into place. Nothing dramatic, but enough to shift the entire narrative. They zoomed in further, examined the corner of the wall, the wooden fence, the faded paint around the doorframe. Every detail carried the unique signature of a specific house. A house they had passed countless times without ever paying attention. And then came the van, a white Renault Kangoo, a plate ending in 66. The exact type of vehicle the user known as Lanky Panda had mentioned in encrypted messages. A small team was dispatched to the area. No sirens, no flashing lights, just an unmarked car rolling quietly down Southport Road. As they slowed in front of the suspected house, everything aligned perfectly with the photograph. The brick color, the style of the door, and the van sitting motionless under the shade of a tree. It was no longer suspicion. It was identification, confirmation, a silent confession McN had unknowingly delivered straight into their hands. In moments like this, investigators do not cheer. They do not shake hands. They simply exchange quiet looks because they understand what such a match means. This is not just a clue. This is the foundation of the entire case. A narrow path leading to a door McN believed no one could ever open. What makes it remarkable is that all of this began with a deeply human moment. A photo taken while he laughed, while he believed he was just living like any other ordinary person. But the police did not view that moment through human eyes. They viewed it through persistence, pattern recognition, and instincts sharpened by years of watching small mistakes expose enormous secrets. And the moment they confirmed McN's address, everything that followed became only a matter of time. When every piece of the puzzle finally fell into place, the police did not wait any longer. They knew McN was not the reckless type. He was calculated, discreet, and more importantly, he was armed. That meant the raid had to be fast, decisive, and absolutely precise. The Matrix team was deployed. These were not the officers you see patrolling neighborhood streets. These were specialists, trained to confront the most dangerous individuals, the kind of people who could shift from silence to violence in seconds. That morning, no one in the neighborhood had any idea what was about to happen. A black van pulled up a few houses away. No sirens, no flashing lights. The doors opened, and armored figures poured onto the street. They moved quickly and firmly, not a second of hesitation. When the door was breached, the sound was more than just splintering wood. It was the echo of months of surveillance, of long nights spent analyzing data, of patience compressed into a single explosive moment. Inside the house, everything contrasted sharply with the peaceful exterior. In the attic, officers found a handgun carefully hidden. Not a replica, not a relic. A fully functional weapon, ready to fire. In a drawer, bundles of cash were stacked tightly. On the table lay documents, lists, and notes tied to drug distribution operations. Things McN believed he had buried deep enough that no one would ever uncover them. The officers did not cheer. They did not celebrate. For them, the moment of arrest is never a victory. It is the heaviest part of the job, the part where they face the reality that this person, dangerous or not, has stepped too far away from the ordinary life he once had. And when they escorted McN out of his home, hands cuffed, head lowered, what stood out was not the threat he posed, but the collapse of a life built on the illusion that he was untouchable. The raid ended swiftly and cleanly. No one was harmed. But for McN, those few minutes erased everything he had built in the shadows. The door closing behind him was also the door closing on the world he thought he could control. The day McN stepped into the courtroom, He was no longer the hidden name buried behind layers of encryption, no longer Lanky Panda, no longer the invisible man the police had to trace piece by piece. He was simply a human being standing before the law, carrying every mistake he had made. No technological armor, no flawless disguise, just slumped shoulders and the tired eyes of someone who finally understood that every door had closed. The courtroom was cold and still. No noise, no commotion, only the weight of a story whose ending everyone already knew. The prosecutor read the list of charges as if reciting the chapters of Magna's life in the underworld: drug trafficking, money laundering, possession of firearms, the messages, the photos, the traces he believed he had buried in the dark. When the judge delivered the 17-year sentence, McN did not react. No anger, no denial, no desperate attempt to defend himself. He simply stood there, silent and almost hollow. Perhaps because he understood the sentence was not only for his crimes, it was for his blind confidence. For the moment he believed he was smarter than everyone else. For the second he lifted his phone, unaware he was capturing the beginning of his own downfall. What made this trial emotional was not the fall of a crime boss. It was the fall of a man who thought he could live two lives without anyone ever seeing through him. And when officers finally escorted McN out of the courtroom, he no longer looked dangerous. He looked like an ordinary man drowning in the consequences of his own mistake. Looking back at McNaughton's entire case, what stands out is not just the sophistication of his drug network. What makes this story memorable is that it reveals a truth we all know but rarely acknowledge. No matter how powerful technology becomes, no matter how intricate the disguise, the root of every downfall always begins with the human element. McN did not fail because the police had better tools. He failed because he believed he was above the simple, everyday mistakes that make us human. Mistakes born from habit, from overconfidence, from the desire to share a casual moment, from the belief that after hiding for so long, he had become untraceable. If anything destroyed him, it was not technology, but the soft complacency that quietly slipped into his life. Investigators often say criminals never truly fear the system. They fear themselves. Because systems can be bypassed, technology can be exploited, but no one can ever fully control their own human impulses. Humor, comfort, the desire to connect, those fleeting moments when a person forgets the darkness they live in. Moments so small, yet powerful enough to unravel networks built on silence and precision. In McN's story, the saddest part is not the 17-year sentence. The saddest part is realizing that if he had held back for just 1 second, if he had kept his phone in his pocket, if he had remembered that living two lives requires absolute vigilance, his entire life might have unfolded differently. But that is something humans cannot escape. We are not programmed machines. We love, we fear, we laugh, we get tired, and sometimes we make mistakes at the very moment we feel safest. This case makes one truth painfully clear. Criminals fear the police, but what they should fear most are the deeply human parts of themselves. Because in the end, it was those parts that spoke the words he tried to hide, those parts that pressed the shutter button, those parts that made the entire empire collapse in silence. Looking back at McN's journey, one thing becomes unmistakably clear. Technology can create the illusion of safety, but it cannot erase human nature. Technology may make criminals more sophisticated, but it also makes them forget that one small mistake, one moment of softness, one natural human impulse is enough to destroy everything they worked so hard to hide. This case teaches us a simple but powerful lesson. Crime is always a battle between cold calculation and deeply human moments. Technology is just armor, but human error is always the doorway through which truth enters. McN was not defeated by the police. He was defeated by the moment he allowed himself to be just like everyone else. And sometimes, that is exactly why no one can escape justice forever.